Well, today's perspective guest is Nathaniel Powell, an honorary researcher at the Centre for War and Diplomacy at Lancaster University in the UK. His research has centred on the relationship between France and Africa in the post-colonial era, with a particular focus on French security policy. He joins us now from London. Thank you very much for being with us here on France 24. My first question is that this is clearly a vast topic with lots of different angles, and I wanted to start by asking you to give us your own take on the current state of relations between France and Africa as we enter this summit today.
Thanks for having me. So the current state of relations is probably not what Macron would want at the moment. He's entering an election year in 2022. And he's facing kind of a failure of a security policy in the Sahel, in which Operation Barkhane is unable to effectively stem the spread of jihadist groups, and in which he has a major diplomatic crisis with the main pillar of one of the main country pillars of the Barkhane mission, which is Mali, which has been two coups since 2020, and the kind of threats of the current Malian junta to bring in Russian mercenaries have certainly undercut and threatened the French desire to not just exert influence in the Sahel, but also to have or continue its effective security, or continue to mount kind of an effective security policy. And this has certainly undermined his kind of broader diplomatic goals. The other issue is that there's within the kind of areas of French traditional influence, that is the Francophone countries in the continent, the former colonies, there have been 4 or 5 coups or coup attempts in the past year. And France has kind of unambiguously endorsed at least one of them in Chad. And this has certainly kind of put a stain, I think, on any kind of French pretensions to uphold regional security. Sorry, and kind of to extend its influence.
Now, if we look at the programme today in Montpellier, we have citizen engagement, entrepreneurship and innovation, higher education, culture and sport all on the agenda. Is it your view that France is perhaps glossing over some of the more pressing, the more bigger issues at these talks?
Well, in a way, it's the opposite. So Macron is trying to change the optics of French engagement on the continent, which is why he's kind of stepped away from focus on interstate and kind of formal state-to-state relations between France and African leaders. And part of that has to do with the kind of bad reputation that France's kind of traditional allies have. There's only, let's see, Senegal, Mauritania, Burkina Faso, perhaps Niger, among the kind of traditional areas of French influence that can actually claim to kind of be elective democracies at the moment. So having the traditional France-Africa meeting in which you'd have 15, 20, or 30 African heads of state come and visit Paris would kind of reinforce this image of France as a kind of backer of regional kind of autocracy. So Macron's instead kind of shifted gears, and he's appointed Kylian Mbappé, who's a very kind of prominent intellectual, to kind of lead an effort to bring together African youth, political activists, but also artists, musicians, entrepreneurs, to come to Paris, and instead of focusing on this kind of state-to-state aspect of Franco-African relations, which has come under lots of criticism, to try to broaden the image of France's relation to the continent, which goes beyond simply state-to-state relations, but also involves a vast African diaspora linked to France. And the idea is also to try to encourage French businesses to invest in Africa, which has been a keystone of kind of Macron's policy since he came to office, and to try to draw the attention of the media away from the kind of more problematic aspects of the Franco-African relationship.
Now, in recent months and since he became president, Macron has, of course, tried to heal old wounds and move forward somewhat on certain dossiers. This year, of course, he asked for forgiveness for France's role in the Rwandan genocide in 1994. Have such presidential gestures cut deep enough in Africa, though?
I mean, they're certainly welcomed at one level, and he is the first president to go as far as he has in making these kind of symbolic gestures related to the history of French the very negative aspects of French history in the continent. but they are kind of surface level. And the problem that Macron has, and broader French government has, is that its relationship with the continent is still very heavily focused on security issues, and still returning Benin bronzes to West Africa, making amends with Rwanda, even trying to move forward on the dossier of the history of the French war in Algeria, although that's run into some hiccups recently. These are certainly kind of moves forward, but they don't address the fundamental issue, which is the vast majority of French resources dedicated to the continent are still engaged in kind of military interventions, counterterrorism, and that sort of thing. And Macron, even despite the reduction of the Operation Barkhane, is still in a situation in which this is still a major driver of French policy in the continent, and that's unlikely to change anytime soon.
Now, what impact has the growing influence of big gun countries like Russia and China had on France and its position when it comes to security in Africa? And does France in any way find itself or feel that it's clinging on or trying to cling on to its influence vis-a-vis Russia and China?
There is an element of trying to cling on to influence and trying to regain lost influence. I mean, France's market share in its former colonies has declined precipitously since the 1990s, really. In West Africa, it sits around 11% or so. The amount of the percentage of kind of French foreign investments in the continent is extremely small, an infinitesimal part of French overseas investment. So in terms of that kind of influence, there's certainly been a decline. And Macron does have a desire, as part of a broader aspect, a broader element of kind of trying to expand France's position in the world to try to claw back some of the lost influence it's lost to China and Russia. There's also the geopolitical dimension. Russia is seen as a major threat, especially given the way they've intervened massively in the Central African Republic in the form of the Wagner mercenary organization, and the negative impacts that's had. And the risk of that this group may end up establishing themselves in Mali certainly would be seen by Macron and other French policymakers as being a major blow to their efforts to kind of maintain France's profile. The flip side of that is that a lot of this is less Russian expansion than opportunism on the side of African leaders who are trying to look for an alternative to or to put pressure on the French to loosen pressure for democratizing reforms or that sort of thing. So, like in the Cold War, France is trying to kind of fight a geopolitical struggle on the continent where maybe the threat is perhaps exaggerated, but the risks are real, and the alternative that France offers might not appeal to coup makers or other autocrats in the continent, who are people that France had previously kind of cultivated and helped bring to power.
Okay, Nathaniel Powell, an honorary researcher at the Center for War and Diplomacy at Lancaster University. That's all we have time for. But thank you so much for being with us for today's Perspective segment here on France 24. Thank you so much.